Hello. I wanted to share with you a few thoughts as it relates to questions we've been getting about the giant issues of how can sin and evil and hate exist in the same place that God is supposed to exist. There are so many people that question whether or not we're really in a place where God has any effect on a world that seems like it can be so brutal and cruel and evil. How can we possibly understand in a way that makes sense how something so evil as someone walking into a school and shooting 26 people dead, or knocking the windows out of a hotel and terrorizing hundreds of people, injuring hundreds. How do you get an understanding of how God could let something like this happen? The question is, how can there be cancer in the world? How can there be cruelty in the world? How can there be terrifying things in the world? And still, we talk about having a loving God. And this is not something that's easy. This is not something that takes just a simple person to figure out. I've been working on this message for a better part of 3 years. How do I make it so that it's understandable? I may not have succeeded even now, but I'm gonna try and explain it to you. And the way I'm going to explain it is just a little different than someone might in a different situation. When the Bible was written, they didn't have the advantage of something like Google Earth or satellite photography. They basically were pretty well tied to the earth. But since we have those capabilities, I want you to kind of get in your head in a picture of what it's like to look down from a satellite and look at our world. Okay? And if you look at our human existence from 250 miles overhead, the satellite image might look like this. All right? You see the reality of evil in the world. And I put several of those things in here. Cruelty, viciousness, debauchery, murder, savageness. Remember the ISIS chopping people's heads off? Just savageness. Lies being told as though they were the truth. These things about evil, I didn't put them all down there because I got depressed. I had to quit. We always are concerned about injustice in the world. How can a world that's supposed to have a loving God allow things to happen that just are completely unjust? That's not fair. It's against the law that just seems to cry out. You can't do that to people. We see beatings and all kinds of, the nightly news gets to be a little discouraging. Injustice. And what are some of those things that I put over here in the area of injustice? Bigotry. Accepting inequity as though it was okay. Accepting the reality that people are just being put away as though they weren't important. and their needs are not important. They're okay. You know, we're not going to just kill a bunch of them and that kind of stuff. But I'm not going to be the least bit compassionate if you say you have been victimized in your home and you're escaping all kinds of violence and the possibility of death in your homeland. I'm going to accept that you should live that way. That's your home. Okay, you have to live. Go ahead and go back home and die. Accepting inequity, cheating the helpless, putting people who were the least able to defend themselves in the most horrific situations. That's part of the injustice. Prejudice. Prejudice means drawing conclusions about who a person is by something that they see or, you know, instinctively respond to on the outside. It doesn't make sense. That's not who's really there. But they're making judgments about whether or not a person is a worthwhile person just on the basis of something outside. They use the law to break the law. This is injustice. All right, and I'm going to go down here to the bottom. Revenge. Revenge. Over and over and over again, we've seen societies, you don't have to go back that many years, where they said, here is the reason why we're having all these problems. It's these people over here. If you were just born in my tribe, if you were born in my family, if you were born with my ethnic identity, then I wouldn't be angry with you. But because you're not, I'm going to do things like ethnic cleansing. I'm going to do genocide. I don't care who you are. I'm going to drop cluster bombs on you. I'm going to drop chemical warfare on your head. I'm going to poison your water. I'm going to kill your children just because I hate everyone that isn't just like me. All right? You're my enemy because you're not like me. Exterminations. We see it constantly. And then over here on this side, we have hate, rage, riots, hostility, vengeance. All of these things mean there's this burning, violent urge inside of people to just hurt and maim and destroy. Okay, looking down from 250 miles up in the sky, you see the whole outline of our world. And it doesn't look that good, honestly. There's some things here that turn my stomach. From the sky, you can't necessarily see that there's high places and low places. So I drew this little circle on here to show you that from the satellite image, there is a mountain that is built up in here in the middle of our map. Okay? It's higher than the rest of the territory. It's like looking down on, you know, Mount Tabor. It happens to be a mountain that just basically sticks up right in the middle of a big open plain area. There are a lot of mountains that just basically, they're just pushed up into the air at a higher altitude, and all the ground around it is lower, it's farther away. All right? So I circled that to show you that there is a sloping upward look. And in that sloping upward look, there is a growing sense of goodness. All right? Inside the circle, I put, in place of evil, there is goodness. Goodness. I didn't explain what that is, because somehow I think you understand what that means. It's sort of the opposite from evil. All right? Over here, next to injustice, I put the word compassion. And as you come up the slope and you climb the mountain that's here in the middle, you get closer and closer to a compassion, a gentleness, a willingness to listen, a sense of trying to be there to help, a willingness to take on your burdens as my burdens. I feel your pain. Next to revenge, I put over here forgiveness. Forgiveness is that thing that says it's not fun to forgive you, it's not easy to forgive, but it's important that we have peace, and I willingly, freely forgive. And as we get closer to that mountain, all right, we'll find a more and more willingness to forgive. And that offsets the revenge that never goes away. And over here by hate, I put the word love. Now, okay, you say, well, that's fine. You've made this great picture. All right, now you've got this mountain and you got this whole thing, and the people who are down here are bad, and the people up here, but you still haven't told how God and evil can exist in the same universe, the same world. Well, at the very top of the mountain, at the very pinnacle right here at the cross, this is Jesus Christ. And he is at the very tip top of the mountain, all the way around. You can look out over the plain in all directions. He called himself the light of the world. He called himself the light. And what I'm going to try and give you a picture of is right on the top of that mountain there is an airport beacon. You know those big lights that swing around and show out over the entire area that give airplane pilots a chance to find out where the airport is, where it's safe to land. Or a searchlight, a light that's actually searching in all directions to try and highlight something that so that people know what direction to come, where it's safe. They can leave the dangerous areas and they can come to where the searchlight is. Do you remember the two towering lights that stood where the Twin Towers were, that just shot up in the air all the way into outer space? For so long they were so bright, they were so brilliant. It was like anybody from anywhere around the area for dozens and maybe even 50 miles could see these pillars of light standing up in the air. Or a lighthouse shining out with gigantic brilliant beams, turning and revealing all the dangers and all the things that you have to be careful of. And so if you look at this mountain that we've made here, and you realize God has called us to be closer and closer and closer to being like Jesus Christ. That's the command of Scripture. Jesus actually commanded us, love in the same way that I have loved you. You've got to do exactly what I've been doing, taking care of people in a loving way. In all these things, exactly as I've been doing. Okay? And so this bright light is shedding out in all directions, swinging around. You see, light and darkness live in the same universe as God and evil. If we want to live in the light, we have to get closer and closer to the light. If we don't want to live in the light, we get farther and farther away from the source of the light. Light and evil are not really in a competition with each other. They just exist in the same universe. Jesus Christ took every ounce of evil that this world could pour out on him. They were cruel. They were vicious. They were malicious in every way. They publicly humiliated him in ways I can't even explain to you on a video like this. They gave him every ounce of their rage, of their hate, of their vengeance, of their disgust for him was just poured out on him. They went into every kind of genocide and vengeance to try and get rid of him. You are not one of us. We have to get rid of you. We have to exterminate you. You can't live in the same world in which we live. Injustice. There wasn't a single charge brought against him. There wasn't a single witness stood up to say that he had harmed them in any way. And yet he was condemned to a death twice as hard as a serial killer might get. And yet, because he had been at the very pinnacle of being obedient to his Father's will, he didn't return one single harsh, angry, bitter word. From the cross, as they're killing him in the most horrific way, he's looking down at his mother at the foot of the cross and making arrangements for her to be taken care of by his very best friend in all the world. Does that sound like a vengeful, hateful, mean, evil, vicious, detestable person? When he said to his Father, "Forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing," does that sound like he's putting any of these evil intents back on those who poured it out on him? No. He absorbed it all and didn't return any of it. Because, you see, to be the light, he had to show it clearly to the entire universe, the entire world. Our world is looking for someone who doesn't just respond like everybody else does. Jesus died in the most amazing way so that even the soldiers who were standing there watching him die, who had maybe even been a part of beating him almost to the point of death, certainly had walked with him all the way up till Calvary, at the summit of Golgotha. They placed the cross upon which he was standing at the very summit of that hill. And they watched a lot of people die. And he didn't die like anybody else did. They'd never seen it before. And even the centurion said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Now, I say that to you because if you make up your mind that God's in control of everything, so he ought to eliminate all these things, you forget he gave us the job of eliminating these things. He said, "Do what I've been doing." He didn't make every soldier lay down their weapons. He didn't get rid of the Roman government. He didn't even forbid slavery. He helped, he encouraged, he healed, he shared, he loved, he accepted people that would have been unacceptable to anyone else. Then he said, "Now, I'm giving you the job that I had been given to live. You have to send the light out to all these people who have no other way of knowing that God cares about them except that they see the light coming from this searchlight up on top of the mountain. And if they have a heart, if they have a desire to live with compassion and forgiveness, if they are searching for God's kind of love, if they have a desire to live with people who are profoundly good, they will come toward the light. They will come closer and closer to that beacon, the hope, the power that's there. In a world where God is simply showing us exactly what he had intended us to live like, to be like, to put into our own lives, into action, to be a part of the great light that draws all people toward that light. Nobody wants to live in a hateful world. Nobody wants to live in a world filled with revenge. They want to go home. They want to put their feet up. They want to be safe. They want to have their families. They want to have their children. They want to be able to rock their grandchildren. They don't want to have to watch over their shoulders every minute. They don't want to live with injustice. Try to explain to your kids why it's okay to cheat someone just because they're weak and they can't fight back. Try and share with someone why it's okay to tell lies and claim they're the truth when everybody is harmed by those lies. Try and explain why it's okay to murder. You can't. It's impossible. You can't do it. So, the urgency for us is to be bright enough in being like Jesus, letting his light shine through us so that all people will be drawn to the very center of what God called us to be. See, Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men to me. If I stand at the pinnacle, I will be the light, and everybody who's living in the shadows, in fear, in anger, in bondage, in addictions, all of the people who want to be free will drift toward me to see more and more of what I want the world to look like if we follow God's plan. How can good and evil exist in the same world? It's exactly the same way as light and darkness exist right together every day. I ask you to think about these things, pray about these things, and ask God's Spirit to say, show me how I can be closer. Show me how I can climb up toward that pinnacle, that mountaintop. And I can bring my family. I can bring my friends. I can bring the people I love most in all the world. And they can have refuge and safety and joy and peace here, right next to where Jesus Christ is working.